ॐ भूर्भुवः स्वः तत्सवितुर्वरेण्यं भर्गो देवस्य धीमहि धियो यो नः प्रचोदयात् ॐ शान्ति शान्ति शान्तिः अरुणाचलाश्वा 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 ॐ अरुणाचलाराम. My dear brothers and sisters, now I am starting videos on a holy book, that is Talks with Sri Ramana Maharshi. It is most important book by the Ramanasram. It includes almost all the teachings of Maharshi Ramana. It is most important, very useful, and most essential holy book for all the devotees and sadhakas who are engaged in the process of self-enquiry, meditation for self-realization and liberation. So, dear friends, I am starting the first video. Please share these videos, like these videos, comment on these videos, and subscribe my channel so that more and more people will be benefited by my effort of bringing almost all the useful books on in video form. It becomes easy for the people who are working because they may not carry the books and all. So even they can see the videos in their iPhones and all, iPad, iPhone or laptop, wherever they are there. So I start the first video. So here it goes. The talks, first published in 3 volumes, is now issued a handy 1 volume edition. There is no doubt that the present edition will be received by aspirants all over the world with the same veneration and regard that the earlier edition elicited from them. This is not a book to be lightly read and laid aside. It is bound to prove to be an unfailing guide to increasing numbers of pilgrims to the light everlasting. We cannot be too grateful to Sri Munangla S. Venkataramaya, now Swami Ramananda Saraswati, for the record that he kept of the talks covering a period of 4 years from 1935 to 1939. Those devotees who had the good fortune of seeing Bhagwan Ramana will, on reading these talks, become naturally reminiscent and recall with delight their own mental record of the words of Master. Despite the fact that the great sage of Arunachala taught for the most part through silence, he did instruct through speech also, and that too lucidly without baffling and beclouding the minds of his listeners. One would wish that every word that he uttered had been preserved for posterity. But we have to be thankful for what little of the utterances has been put on record. These talks will be found to throw light on the writings of the master, and probably it is best to study them along with the writings, translations of which are available. Sri Ramana's teachings were not given in journal. In fact, the sage had no use for lectures or discourses. His words were primarily addressed to the particular aspirant who felt some difficulty in his spiritual path and sought to have it resolved. But as the same difficulties arise in the quest after the self, and as the method of resolving them is the same. The Maharshi's replies to questions have the quality of universality. It is not all that can ask the right questions or frame them properly. The task of the guru, therefore, is not simply to answer to the point as in an examination paper. He has often to get behind the words that constitute a question and correct the questioner even the matter of questioning. And when irrelevant and futile questions are asked, it is not his business to satisfy the idle curiosity of the questioner or confirm him in his delusions. Sri Ramana does not leave his interlocutor in the place where he was, as one of the devotees put it. All our questions are from our standpoint, and Sri Bhagwan's replies are from his standpoint. The questions are not only answered but are also undermined. Various are the attitude with which one may approach a saint. Skeptics and agnostics, theists and atheists, seekers of miracles and hunters of psychic phenomena, all used to go to the Maharishi. Each would naturally put questions that came uppermost to his or her mind, and the nature of the questions would depend on the attitude and interest of the person concerned. The glory of the master lay in removing the attitudes and interests that were base and making the devotee long for realizing the supreme truth. Visitors to the ashramam often used to put questions to Sri Ramana about occult powers and psychic phenomena. Is it not good to acquire occult powers such as telepathy? Is not the power to make one's body invisible a mark of mature wisdom? Can one read others' minds? The master's reply to all such questions was that the occult and the miraculous are not the spiritual. The supernormal normal powers are more hindrances than the helps in the path to supreme spirituality. Some questioners were interested in matters relating to the dead. What happened to the dead? Can one see them? Here again, Sri Ramana taught that these problems were irrelevant and that no seeker after the truth should be concerned with them. An aristocratic and distinguished lady visitor once inquired, Maharaj ji, can we see the dead? The master replied, yes. The lady asked, can the yogis show them to us? The master, yes, they may be. But do not ask me to show them to you, for I cannot. The lady, do you see them? The master, yes, in dreams. Sri, Sri Ramana's central teaching is self inquiry. Instead of wanting to know this and that, seek to know the self. Ask, who am I? Instead of asking about 100 other things, self inquiry ought to be the easiest of all tasks. But it seems to be the most difficult because we have become strangers to ourselves. What one has to do is simple to abide as the self. This is the ultimate truth. This is one's eternal, natural, inherent state. One account of ignorance we identify ourselves with the not I. The most subtle of all these identification is with the ego. Let us search for the root of the ego. Where from does this pseudo I arise? At the end of this quest, we shall find that the ego disappears, letting the eternal self shine. So, the best discipline is the enquiry. Who am I? This is the greatest japa. This is the true pranayama. The thought I am not the body, na aham, is exhalation, rechaka. The enquiry, who am I? Koham is inhalation, purka. The realization, I am he, soham, is a retention of breath, kumbhaka. The fruit of self-inquiry is the realization that the self is all and that there is nothing else. For those who follow this method, no other sadhana is necessary. But even those who adopt the discipline of devotion bhakti reach the same goal. If one surrenders one ego to either the Guru or God, one realizes the self. Sri Ramana's teachings, as found in the talks, will bring hope to everyone. No one need think that he is beyond the pale of redemption. An old American visitor once asked the master, Maharshi, do you think we are bad boys? The master's characteristic reply was, do not tell me so, but you need not think you are bad boys. Anything that is bad in us will surely be removed. And if only we listen to the Maharshi's wise words that are recorded in the present book, and maybe read it with a view to preparing ourselves for understanding the Master's higher teachings, which was thought silence, which was through silence. So this was written by T.M.P. Mahadevan. Now, introduction of the talks with Bhagwan Sri Ramana Maharshi. These talks cover a period of 4 years, 1935 to 1939, and were all recorded by Sri Munangala S. Venkatarmaya, now Swami Ramananda Saraswati, a very old disciple of Sri Ramana Maharshi. Though a Telugu by birth, he speaks English and Tamil fluently and is conversant with Sanskrit. These are necessary qualifications for one who wished to record the conversations of Sri Bhagwan with his various disciples and visitors. The 4 years that are covered here were the days when the ashramam reached the summit of its glory. Maharishi's health was on the whole good, and the hall where he sat was open day and night to the welcome one and all. Visitors flocked there from every corner of the world. There was hardly a country that was not represented at one time or another. The war naturally interfered with with this influx, though the number of Indian visitors steadily increased as time went on. But it was these conversations, many with Westerners, that were especially interesting. The modern tendency towards materialism and irreligion, on which the West often prides itself, met its match here. Sri Bhagwan glowed like the sun, and even those who did not understand him or agree with his words were fascinated and could not help but he elevated but be well elevated by his presence. Though Sri Venkataramaya was fully qualified for the work, to follow Sri Bhagwan was no easy task when he once started to talk. He had such a command of his subject that he was never at a loss for a word in whichever language he might happen to be speaking. So few notes could be taken, the listeners being too busy trying not to lose a word of what was being said, added to which it was not always easy to understand. Sri Venkataramaya acted as interpreter for the many English speaking people who flocked to the ashramam. As Sri Bhagwan was reluctant to say more than a few words in that language, though he knew it sufficiently well to read the English newspapers and magazines, but to act as interpreter was an even more difficult task than just recording. The flow of words was so steady that no interval was left in which their meaning could be conveyed to the ardent questioner. Often Bhagwan had to be asked to wait while his words were conveyed to the anxious listener. So, the difficulties of making this record can easily be imagined. Only one who had sat for years at the feet of the master and had thoroughly absorbed his philosophy and the way he expounded it was competent for the task. Sri Venkatamaya, the ideal person for this had luckily been found. That the language used here is not always elegant is admitted. This was to be expected in the circumstances. Doubtless it could have been corrected, but it has been left much as it was. As it was felt that a certain spontaneity that it now possesses would otherwise have been lost. Though the conversations were in various South Indian languages, most of it was recorded in English, the rest in Tamil and Telugu, which passages have been translated for the purpose of this book. The completed notes were often shown to the questioners for verification, but the whole had the seal of approval of Sri Bhagwan himself, as the records were always shown to him for his approval or the necessary alteration after they had been entered in the notebook. Thus, we may be sure that here we have the exact teaching of the Master, and reading them, we once again sit at his feet in the old hall, drinking in every word that falls from his lips and raptured by his smile, the movement of his delicate hands and his actions. For, for he was a true artist, often acting the part of the story he was telling, the better to drive home his point. Some may be inclined to criticize this book as monotonous, but this posed monotony is deliberate, for some new point is always brought out, however similar the talk may seem. Sri Bhagwan always stressed the one essential truth that was necessary for liberation, that there is only one self and nothing but the self. Know that, and everything else is known. This cannot be repeated too often. Doubtless, an intellectual grasp of this fact sets one on the path, but the path once started, mental knowledge must then become actual experience. To know a thing absolutely, not just superficially, one must be that thing. Otherwise, knowledge is incomplete. As I pointed out, we are always nothing but the self. But associating ourselves with the ignorance of limitation, with an ego, we forget the seer and identify ourselves with the seen. But what can we do about it? The habit is so long standing, birth after birth has been imagined, and century after century has been fabricated by the mind. It has thus involved itself more and more in ignorance, that it now finds itself disinclined and even if willing, almost unable to disentangle itself from the thralls of the play world it has created. You are the self, he tells us, nothing but the self. Anything else is just imagination. So be the self here and now. There is no need to run off to a forest or shut oneself in a room. Carry on with your essential activities, but free yourself from association with the doer of them. Self is the witness you are that. Example after example is given in these talks in language to suit all tastes and mentalities. The reading of the book automatically drives one inward to the source. It is itself a sufficient sadhana. Do not delude yourself, you are already that. There is nothing more to be obtained, only false association to be shed, limitation to be recognized as illusory. His method of doing this is well known: self enquiry, always and at all times. Seek for the source of the ego, the apparent actor, and on the attainment of that goal, he tells us the ego will drop away of its own accord, and nothing will be left but the all blissful self. But this is not the place to go into details of method for those interested. The necessary books can be easily be obtained from Sri Ramana Maharshi. What more is there to say but to advise one and all to read this book and try and make it a part of themselves? Not one word to be passed over lightly or one conversation to be dismissed as superfluous. It is all pure gold, and here again we find the ever living Sri Ramana Maharshi before us in person, teaching us in his own inimitable words for our benefit and delight. It was found after preparing this book for the press that the first part was not in chronological order, but rather than delay publication, it was decided not to alter the present arrangement as it makes absolutely no difference to the context. The dates are only included for reference and as a guarantee of authenticity. So the recorder has written few lines. In a very critical and distressing period of his life, an humble devotee sought the presence of Bhagwan Sri Ramana Maharshi for his own peace of mind and lived in the ashramam with the kind permission of the Sarva Adhikari Sri Niranjanananda Swami. The seeker took it upon himself to note down as occasions arose the sweet, refreshing, and enlightening words of the Master. This self imposed task was undertaken for the purification of his own mind and better understanding of the subtle and profound words of Sri Bhagwan. Shortly after, the Sarvadhikari officially took them over to the ashram. These notes covering the period 1935 to 1939 are included in the present volumes with the hope that some readers may find them interesting and helpful in their spiritual quest. A few extracts from these notes have already appeared in the Ashramam publication Maharishi's Gospel. So now the actual talks starts from here. Talks with Sri Ramana Maharshi, Talks with Sri Ramana Maharshi, Volume 1, 15th May 1935, Talk number 1. A wandering monk sannyasi was trying to clear his doubt how to realize that all the world is God. Maharshi replied, if you make your outlook that of wisdom, you will find the world to be God. Without knowing the Supreme Spirit, Brahma, how will you find His all pervasiveness? Talk number 2. Someone inquired about the nature of perception. Maharshi replied, whatever state one is in, The perceptions partake of that state. The explanation is that in the waking state, Jagrat, the gross body perceives gross names and forms. In Swapna, the dream state, the mental body perceives the mental creations in their manifold forms and names. In the Susupti, deep dreamless sleep, the identification with the body being lost, there are no perceptions. Similarly, in the transcendental state, identity with Brahma places the man in harmony with everything, and there is nothing apart from his self. Talk number three. A question was asked as to the nature of happiness. Maharshi replied, if a man thinks that his happiness is due to external causes and his possessions, it is reasonable to conclude that his happiness must increase with the increase of possessions and diminish in proportion to their diminution. Therefore, if he is devoid of possessions, his happiness should be nil. What is the real experience of man? Does it conform to this view? In deep sleep, the man is devoid of possessions, including his own body. Instead of being unhappy, he is quite happy. Everyone desires to sleep soundly. The conclusion is that happiness is inherent in man and is not due to external causes. One must realize his self in order to open the store of unalloyed happiness. Talk number four. Maharshi was asked by an educated young man, how do you say that the heart is on the right, whereas the biologists have found it to be on the left? The man asked for authority. Maharshi replies, quite so. The physical organ is on the left, that is not denied, but the heart of which I speak is non physical and is only on the right side. It is my experience. No authority is required by me. Still, you can find confirmation in a Malayalam Ayurvedic book and in Sita Upanishad. And he produced the quotation mantra from the latter and repeated the text shloka from the former. Talk number five. Mr. M. Friedman, an engineer, remarked on the subject of grace. A salt doll diving into the sea will not be protected by a waterproof coat. It was a very happy smile and was applauded as such. Maharshi added, the body is the waterproof coat. Talk number six. A question was asked by a monk, sannyasi, about how to prevent the mind from being distracted. Maharshi replied, you see these objects on forgetting your own self. If you keep hold of yourself, you will not see the objective world. Talk number seven. When asked if occult powers, siddhis, can be achieved along with omnipotence, Iswartva, as mentioned in the last verse of Dakshinamurti Ashtakam, Maharshi said, let omnipotence, Iswar be accomplished first and then the other question may be raised. Talk number 8. Can anyone get any benefit by repeating sacred syllables, mantras picked up casually? Maharshi. No, he must be competent and initiated in such mantras. Maharshi illustrated this by the following story. A king visited his premier in his residence. There he was told that the premier was engaged in repetition of sacred syllables, japa. The king waited for him and on meeting him asked what the japa was. The premier said that it was the holiest of all, Gayatri. The king desired to be initiated by the premier, but the premier confessed his inability to initiate him. Therefore, the king learned it from someone else and meeting the minister later, he repeated the Gayatri and wanted to know if it was right. The minister said that the mantra was correct, but it was not proper for him to say it. When pressed for an explanation, the minister called to a page close by and ordered him to take hold of the king. The order was not obeyed. The order was often repeated and still not obeyed. The king flew into a rage and ordered the same man to hold the minister, and it was immediately done. The minister laughed and said that the incident was the explanation required by the king. How? Asked the king. The minister replied, the order was the same and the executor also, but the authority was different. When I ordered, the effect was nil, whereas when you ordered, there was immediate effect. Similarly with mantras. Talk number 9. Someone inquired, why is it said in scriptures that the sage is like a child? Maharshi replied, a child and a sage, Jnani, are similar in a way. Incidents interest a child only so long as they last. It ceases to think of them after they have passed away. So then, it is apparent that they do not leave any impression on the child and it is not affected by them mentally. So it is with a sage. Talk number 10. A visitor asked how to realize oneself in accordance with Maharishi's instructions contained in his text of Truth Revealed, verse 9, supplement. The difficulty was in controlling the mind. Maharishi replied, it is to be. Maharishi replied, it is to be done by controlling the breath. If you practice it by yourself without other help, then the mind is controlled. Otherwise, the mind comes under control spontaneously in the presence of a superior power. Such is the greatness of association with the wise satsanga. Talk number 11. Can destiny, karma ever come to an end? Maharshi. The karmas carry the seeds of their own destruction in themselves. Talk number 12. A man asked the Maharshi to say something to him. When asked what he wanted to know, he said that he knew nothing and wanted to hear something from the Maharshi. Maharshi replied, you know that you know nothing. Find out that knowledge. That is liberation, mukti. Now the date is 6th January 1935. Talk number 13. Mrs. M. A. Pigott, an English lady who had read Search in Secret India, came to see the Maharishi. The services of a disciple as interpreter were provided. There were many visitors at the time in the hall, including some ladies with their infants. The place resounded with noise. At length silence prevailed. Suddenly Maharishi, who seemed to be looking at infinite space, was heard to say softly, monkey. A little baby was then discovered in the doorway. unobserved by the mother who was seated on the other side of the door with a large monkey standing on his hind legs, who with both hands was fondling the child, not hurting it in the slightest, both being at peace with each other in Maharishi's presence. When Maharishi's voice was heard, the monkey jumped away adroitly and disappeared. The incident greatly impressed the lady. 7th January 1935. Is a master necessary for realization? Mrs. Pigott asked first. Mercy replied, the realization is the result of the Master's grace more than teachings, lectures, meditation, etc. They are only secondary aids, whereas the former is the primary and the essential called devotee. What are the obstacles which hinder realization of the self? Master, Maharshi. They are habits of mind, vasanas, devotee. How to overcome the mental habits, vasanas? Maharishi replied, by realizing the self. Devotee is asking, what is a vicious circle? Maharishi replied, it is the ego which raises such difficulties, creating obstacles and then suffers from the perplexity of apparent paradoxes. Find out who makes the enquiries and the self will be found. A devotee asked, what are the aids for realization, Maharishi? The teachings of the scriptures and of realized soul. Devotee. Can such teachings be discussions, lectures, and meditations? Maharishi replied, yes, all these are only secondary aids, whereas the essential is the Master's grace. Devotee. How long will it take for one to get that? Maharishi. Why do you desire to know? Devotee. To give me hope. Maharishi, even such a desire is an obstacle. The self is ever there. There is nothing without it. Be the self, and the desires and the doubts will disappear. Such self is the witness in sleep, dream, and waking states of existence. These states belong to the ego. The self transcends even the ego. Did you not exist in sleep? Did you did you know then that you were asleep or unaware of the world? Is it only in the waking state that you describe the experience of sleep as being unawareness? Therefore, the consciousness when asleep is the same as that when awake. If you know what this waking consciousness is, you will know the consciousness which witnesses all the three states. Such consciousness could be found by seeking the consciousness as it was in sleep. Devotee, in that case, I fall asleep. Mercy, no harm. Devotee, it is a blank. Maharshi, for whom is the blank? Find out. You cannot deny yourself at any time. The self is ever there and continues in all states. Devotee, should I remain as if in sleep and be watchful at the same time? Maharshi, yes. Watchfulness is the waking state. Therefore, the state will not be one of sleep, but sleepless sleep. If you go the way of your thoughts, you will be carried away by them and you will find yourself in an endless maze. Devotee. So, then I must go back tracing the source of thoughts. Maharshi, quite so. In that way, the thoughts will disappear and the self alone will remain. In fact, there is no inside or outside for the self. They are also projections of the ego. The self is pure and absolute. Devotee. It is understood intellectually only. Is not intellect a help for realization? Maharshi, yes, up to a certain stage. Even so, realize that the self transcends the intellect. The latter must itself vanish to reach the self. Devotee, does my realization help others? Maharshi, yes, certainly. It is the best help possible, but there are no others to be helped. For a realized being sees the self just like a goldsmith estimating the gold in various jewels. When you identify yourself with the body, then only the forms and shapes are there. But when you transcend your body, the others disappear along with your body consciousness. Devotee, is it so with plants, trees, etc.? Maharshi, do they exist at all apart from the self? Find it out. You should. You think that you see them. The thought is projected out from yourself. Find out where from it rises. Thoughts will cease to rise and the self alone will remain. I understand theoretically, but they are still there. Maharshi. Yes, it is like a cinema show. There is the light on the screen and the shadows flitting across impress the audience as the enactment of some piece. Similarly, also will it be. If in the same play an audience also is shown, the seer, the scene will then only be the screen. Apply it to yourself. You are the screen. The self has created the ego. The ego has its accretions of thoughts which are displayed displayed as the world, the trees, plants, etc., of which you are asking. In reality, all these are nothing but the self. If you see the self, the same will be found to be all, everywhere and always. Nothing but the self exists. Devotee, yes, I still understand only theoretically. Yes, the answers are simple and beautiful and convincing. Maharshi, even the thought I do not realize is a hindrance. In fact, the self alone is. Talks with Maharshi Ramana, 8th January 1935, talk number 14. An old man came and sat in the hall. Maharshi was reading Sharma's Sanskrit recensions of Arunachala Aksara Manamalai, the first of the five hymns to Arunachala. The man asked softly, it is said that realization is beyond expression, and expression always fails to describe the realization. How is it? Maharshi replied, the point has been mentioned in Arunachala Ashtakam, verse 3, where it is admitted that although the expression of realization is impossible, still its existence is indicated. Soon after, there were visible signs of emotion in the man. His breath was deep and hard, and he fell on the floor, prostrating humbly, and got up only after 1 or 2 minutes. Remain, Remaining calm a brief while, he left the place. Evidently, the man had some illumination. He sought confirmation from the Maharshi, who responded fittingly. He found confirmation and humbly and feelingly acknowledged the divine intercession on his behalf. Talk number 15. A question was asked about the Upanishadic passage. The Supreme Spirit is subtler than the subtlest and larger than the largest. Maharshi. Even the structure of the atom has been found by the mind. Therefore, the mind is subtler than the atom. That which is behind the mind, namely the indivisible soul, is subtler than the mind. Further, the Tamil saint Manik Vatsgar has said of the aspects of dancing in a beam of sunlight that if each represents a universe, the whole sunlight will represent the Supreme Being. 19th January 1935, talk number 16. Mr. Douglas Ansley, Mr. Grant Duff, an aristocratic English gentleman, 70 years old, nephew of a former governor of Madras, an author and poet formerly attached to the British legation in Athens, Paris, and The Hague, had come to Madras as a guest of government house. He came to see Maharshi with a letter of introduction from Paul Brunton. Next day he returned and remained a little less than an hour in the hall. On both days, practically no words were exchanged and only gaze, gaze. His habits are abstemious. A- abstemious. He remains without food of any kind till 1 p.m. and then lunches. He is said to have coffee and biscuits in the evening and retires without any further food. He has been a bachelor all along, walks a few miles a day on an empty stomach, speaks little and is very graceful in his movements. His voice is low and soft, and his words appear to come from the heart. He has friends among whom might be counted the late Sir John Woodroffe, Sir Sarvepalli Radhakrishnan, and Professor Thomas, Sanskrit professor in Oxford University. He expressed a desire to hear the Vedas. On Monday, a letter arrived from Riga, and the questions therein happen to coincide with the questions the European visitor has asked relating to the existence of departed souls and how best to serve them. The reply sent to Riga was read out to him. Tamil songs from Maharshi's Truth Revealed and the Vedas were repeated in his presence. He considered the recitations magnificent. He came the next afternoon and to the wonder of others had an experience on the previous night which he prepared repeated to Maharshi. It was that he had seen something like an electric light within himself in the heart center on the right side. And he added further that he had seen the sun shining within. Maharshi smiled a little and then had a translation of Atma Vidya, self knowledge, read out to him, wherein there is the cryptic saying that realization consists in reaching the Atma, self, which is the expanse of consciousness, Chidvayam, as distinguished from the mind, which is the expansion of Chitvayamam. This explanation appealed to him. Speaking of him later, Maharshi remarked, just think of an old man of 70 not choosing to live peacefully in his own house on the income he had earned. How intense has been his earnestness that he has left his native land, dared a sea voyage of 6,000 miles, and faced the hardships of long railway journey in a foreign land, ignorant of the language, undergoing the vicissitudes of a lonely life, submitting to the inclemency of a hot climate in surroundings uncongenial and unaccustomed to him. He could have been happy in his own house. It is his longing for internal peace that has brought him here. Quiet so, the intensity of his Earnestness is revealed by his illuminating experiences here within 4 days of his arrival, people say. With regard to the question concerning departed souls, so long as a man identifies himself with his gross body, the thought materialized as gross manifestations must be real to him, because his body is imagined to have originated from another physical being. The other exists as truly as his own body. Having existed here once, it certainly survives death because the offspring is still here and feels he has been born of the other. Under these circumstances, the other world is true and the departed souls are the benefited by prayers offered for them. On the other hand, considered in a different way, the one reality is the self from whom has sprung the ego, which contains within itself the seeds of predispositions acquired in previous births. The self illumined the ego, the predispositions, and also the gross senses, whereupon the predispositions appear to the senses to have materialized as the universe and become perceptible to the ego, the reflection of the self. The ego identifies itself with the body and so loses sight of the self, and the result of this inward inadvertence is dark ignorance and the misery of the present life. The fact of the ego rising from the self and forgetting it is birth. So it may be said that the birth of the individual has killed the mother. The present desire to regain one's mother is in reality the desire to regain the self, which is the same as realizing one's self or the death of the ego. This is surrender unto the mother, so she may live eternally. Maharshi then read out from the Tamil version of Yoga Vasishtha the story of Tapasi, who had two sons, Punya and Papa. After the death of the parents, the younger one mourns loss mourned the loss, and elder brother consoled him as follows: Why do you mourn the loss of our parents? I shall tell you where they are. They are only within ourselves and are ourselves. For the life current has passed through innumerable incarnations, births and deaths, pleasures and pains, etc., just as the water current in a river flows over rocks, pits, sands, elevations, and depressions on its way, but still the current is unaffected. Again, the pleasures and pains, births and deaths are like undulations on the surface of seeming water in the mirages of ego. The only reality is the self from where the ego appears and runs through thoughts which manifest themselves as the universe and in which the mothers and fathers, friends, and relatives appear and disappear. They are nothing but manifestations of the self, so that one's parents are not outside the self. So there is no reason to mourn. Learn it, realize it, and be happy. 24th January 1935, talk number 17. Mr. W. Y. Evans Vance, an English research scholar of Oxford University, brought a letter of introduction from Mr. Brunton and arrived on a visit. He was tired after his journey and required rest. He is quite accustomed to Indian ways of living, having visited this country several times. He has learned the Tibetan language and helped in the translation of the Book of the Dead and the Life of Milarepa, the greatest of Tibetan yogis, and a third book on the Tibetan secret doctrines. In the afternoon, he began to ask a few questions they related to yoga. He wanted to know if it was right to kill animals such as tigers, deer, etc., and use the skin for yoga postures. Asana. The mind is the tiger or the deer. Devotee. If everything be illusion, then one can take lies. Mercy. To whom is illusion? Find that out. In fact, everyone is a killer of the self. Atma Han. Every moment of his life. Devotee. Which posture asana is the best? Maharshi. Any asana, possibly Sukhasana. Each posture or the half Buddha position, but that is immaterial for jnana, the path of knowledge. Devotee. Does posture indicate the temperament? Maharshi. Yes. What are the properties and effects of the tiger's skin, wool or deer skin, etc.? Maharshi. Some have found them out and related them in yoga books. They corresponded to conductors and non-conductors of magnetism, etc. But it is all immaterial for the path of knowledge, Jnana Marga. Posture really means location and steadfastness in the self. It is internal. The others refer to external positions. Devotee, which time is most suitable for meditation? Mercy, what is time? Devotee, tell me what it is. Mercy, time is only an idea. There is only the reality. Whatever you think it is, it looks like that. If you call it time, it is time. If you call it existence, it is existence, and so on. After calling it time, you divide it into days and nights, months, years, hours, minutes, etc. Time is immaterial for the path of knowledge, but some of these rules and discipline are good for beginners. Devotee, what is Jnana Marga? Maharshi, concentration of the mind is in a way common to both knowledge and yoga. Yoga aims at union of the individual with the universal, the reality. This reality cannot be new. It must exist even now, and it does exist. Therefore, the path of knowledge tries to find out how Viyoga, separation came about. The separation is from the reality only. Devotee. What is illusion? Maharshi replied. To whom is the illusion? Find it out. Then illusion will vanish. Generally, people want to know about illusion and do not examine to whom it is. It is foolish. Illusion is outside and unknown, but the seeker is considered to be known and is inside. Find out what is immediate, intimate, instead of trying to find out what is distant and unknown. Devotee. Does Maharshi advise any physical posture for the Europeans? Maharshi. It may be advisable, however, it must be clearly understood that meditation is not prohibited in the absence of asanas or prescribed times or any accessories of the kind. Devotee. Does Maharshi have any particular method to impart to the Europeans in particular? Maharshi. It is according to the mental equipment of the individual. There is indeed no hard and fast rule. Mr. Evans Vance began to ask questions mostly relating to yoga preliminaries, for all of which Maharshi replied that they are aids to yoga, which is itself an aid to self-realization, the goal of all. Devotee, is work an obstruction to self-realization, Maharshi? No, for a realized being, the self alone is the reality, and actions are only phenomenal, not affecting the self. Even when he acts, he has no sense of being an agent. His actions are only involuntary, and he remains a witness to them without any attachment. There is no aim for this action. Even one who is still practicing uh, Even one who is still practicing the path of wisdom, jnana, can practice while engaged in work. It may be difficult in the earlier stages for a beginner, but after some practice, it will soon be effective and the work will not be found a hindrance to meditation. Devotee. What is the practice? Maharshi, constant search for I, the source of the ego. Find out who am I? The pure I is the reality, the absolute existence, consciousness, bliss. When that is forgotten, all miseries crop up. When that is held fast, the miseries do not affect the person. Is not devotee, is not brahmacharya celibacy necessary for? Huh? Okay, thank you. Devotee, is not brahmacharya celibacy necessary for realization of the self? Maharshi, brahmacharya is living in Brahma. It has no connection with celibacy as commonly understood. A real brahmachari, that is one who lives in Brahma, finds bliss in the Brahma, which is the same as the self. Why then should you look for another source of happiness? In fact, the emergence from the self has been the cause of all the misery. Devotee, celibacy is a sign qua non for yoga. Mercy, so it is. Celibacy is certainly an aid to realization among so many other aids. Devotee, is it then not indispensable? Can a married man realize the self? Mercy, certainly. It is a matter of fitness of mind. Married or unmarried, a man can realize the self because that is here and now. If it were not so, but attainable by some efforts at some other time, and if it were new and something to be acquired, it would not be worthy of pursuit, because what is not natural cannot be permanent either. But what I say is the self is here and now and alone. Devotee, God being immanent in all, one should not take life of any kind. Is society right in taking the life of a murderer? Can the states do so either? The Christian countries begin to think that it is wrong to do so. Maharishi, what is it that prompted the murderer to commit the crime? The same power awards him the punishment. Society or the state is only a tool in the hands of the power. You speak of one life taken away, but what about innumerable lives lost in a war? Devotee, quite so. Loss of lives is wrong anyway. Are wars justified, Maharshi? For a realized man, the one who remains ever in the self, the loss of one or several or all lives, either in this world or in all the three worlds, makes no difference. Even if he happens to destroy them all, no sin can touch such a pure soul. Maharshi quoted the Gita, chapter 18, verse 17. He who is free from the notion of ego, whose intellect is unattached, though he annihilates all the worlds, he slayeth not, nor is he bound by the results of his actions. Devotee, do not one's actions affect the person in after birth? Maharshi, are you born now? Why do you think of other births? The fact is that there is neither birth nor death. Let him who is born think of death and palliatives therefore. Devotee, How long did it take Maharshi to realize the self? Maharshi, this question is asked because the name and form are perceived. These are the perceptions consequent on the identification of the ego with the gross body. If the ego identifies itself with the subtle mind as in dream, the perceptions are subtle also. But in sleep there are no perceptions. Was there not the ego still? Unless it was, there cannot be the memory of having slept. Who was it that slept? You did not say in your sleep that you slept. You say it now in your wakeful state. The ego, therefore, is the same in wakefulness, dream, and sleep. Find out the underlying reality behind these states. That is the reality underlying these. In that state, there is being alone. There is no you, nor I, nor he, nor no present, no past, no future. It is beyond time and space, beyond expression. It is ever there. Just as a plantain Just as a plantain tree produces shoots at its roots before yielding fruits and perishing, and these shoots being transplanted do the same again, so also the original primeval master of antiquity, Dakshinamurti, who cleared the doubts of his rishi disciples in silence, has left shoots which are ever multiplying. The Guru is a shoot of the ever-present state is the nature. Does Maharshi a shoot of that Dakshinamurti? The question does not arise when the self is realized. Devotee, does Maharshi enter the Nirvikalpa Samadhi Maharshi? If the eyes are closed, it is Nirvikalpa. If open, it is